Life begins not with a gift, but with a wound. Before the first cry of the infant, before the first taste of air, there is already the compulsion to breathe, to struggle, to want. The will presses forward like a tyrant disguised as life, demanding motion, demanding hunger, demanding survival. You do not choose this. You awaken already condemned. Desire gnaws at the marrow before consciousness can speak its first word. You are not free to rest. You are compelled to chase, to clutch, to reach. What others call living is only this: a series of endless cravings, each one vanishing as soon as it is touched, replaced by another, sharper thirst. Existence is not a feast, but an endless starvation, dressed up as ritual. Pleasure deceives. It does not grant fullness. It only interrupts the torture of need for a fleeting moment, like a prisoner given one sip of water in chains. It is the pause in suffering, not its absence. And once the pause ends, the chains rattle louder. Every breath testifies against you. The body, celebrated in songs and painted in beauty, is nothing but the executioner's tool ribs, caging lungs that ache, a stomach that never ceases its hunger, a heart that beats only to remind you of its eventual collapse. Lust seizes the body not for joy, but to multiply the cycle of suffering through generations. Even what we call love is only the will's trick, a feverish mask to prolong the species' torment. Animals suffer, yes, but they suffer blindly. Man suffers twice, first in flesh, then in the cruel awareness of his fate. Consciousness sharpens pain into torment. You do not merely feel hunger, you know hunger. You do not merely die, you anticipate death every hour you remain alive. And so, silence becomes the truest companion, for in silence the will is momentarily muffled, and the endless buzzing of demand softens into a shadow. But even here, peace is fragile. The mind, like a prisoner pacing in its cell, returns again to craving, to imagining, to aching for what it cannot hold. You are not alive. You are compelled. Desire is the engine that never sleeps. It burns in the marrow, coils in the gut, spreads through every nerve like fire that consumes itself, yet refuses to die. One longing is barely tasted before it rots into dust, replaced by another, sharper, more insistent hunger. There is no fullness, no completion. Only a perpetual reaching like a hand, forever stretching toward water in a desert, only to touch sand again and again. We call this pursuit life, but it is only postponement. Every pleasure is borrowed against a deeper emptiness. The kiss, the victory, the comfort of a warm bed each flickers for a moment, then fades, leaving behind the same gnawing void. The sweetness of pleasure is nothing but the bitterness of pain interrupted. Its nature is not abundance, but reprieve. The will enslaves the body with a cruelty that has no conscience. The stomach demands to be filled, though it will only empty again. The veins throb with lust, though the climax delivers nothing but a hollowing fatigue. Even rest betrays itself. Sleep, so worshipped, so pursued, offers only a fragile forgetting before the wheel begins again at dawn. The body never ceases to betray the peace it pretends to offer. And what is consciousness but salt rubbed into this wound? The animal suffers because it is hungry, cold, pursued, but man suffers because he knows that suffering has no end. He is cursed to see patterns, to count the days, to measure his decline. The beast does not know of death until it strikes. Man carries the coffin in his thoughts long before it arrives. Each joy is poisoned by anticipation of its end. Each beginning is stalked by the specter of its conclusion. Loneliness spreads in this awareness like frost over the soul. For even when surrounded by others, one knows that no hand can touch the raw nerve of another's inner torment. We speak, we embrace, we join bodies, but the core remains untouched, imprisoned in its private pain. Every consciousness is a solitary cell, and the walls between us are unbreakable. To love is to press two cages against one another, desperate for escape, yet never dissolving the bars. And yet we continue, not because we choose, but because the will demands continuation. It is not life that carries us forward, but compulsion. The will has no ear for reason, no pity, no mercy. It drives the beast to kill, the lover to cling, the addict to consume. It drives us even as we curse it, even as we know it leads us nowhere but the grave. You are not the master of your life. You are the marionette of a force older than time. Culture dresses the chains of existence in silk and gold, but the chains remain. Man, who cannot endure the naked truth of his suffering, drapes himself in illusions. Illusions sanctified, institutionalized, and repeated until they no longer feel like lies. Civilization itself is a mask, an elaborate theater staged to distract the prisoner from the clanging of his shackles. Beneath the noise of society, beneath its monuments and banners, nothing is conquered. The will remains intact, ceaseless, unbroken, endlessly enslaving. Religion was the earliest anesthesia. The trembling creature, terrified by storms, sickness, and death, fashioned gods as one fashions dreams, consolations to soften the terror of reality. These gods offered explanations where there was none, promises where there was only silence. They whispered of eternal reward beyond the grave, of an order behind chaos, of a meaning to pain. But the gods were not born of truth, they were born of fear. Their temples are monuments not to wisdom, but to man's inability to endure the void. Look closely, and you see every ritual, every prayer, every hymn is not praise, but begging. The believer kneels not out of reverence, but out of desperation, the cry of the slave who hopes the master will lessen the whip. And what has history revealed? The gods remain silent. Disease devours, war consumes, and death swallows whole the righteous and the wicked alike. The divine is a mirror in which man sees only his own longing reflected back. Faith is not sight, but blindness willingly maintained. Society, in its secular turn, did not abolish these illusions, it only changed their costume. Progress, that modern idol, is nothing but repetition gilded in new language. The same desires persist, only armed with shinier tools. The hunger for wealth, for power, for recognition drives men as it drove the ancients. They build taller towers, they split atoms, they send machines into the sky. Yet the man beneath the machine remains the same trembling creature, chasing satisfaction that never arrives. Progress is not liberation. It is acceleration of the same futility. Work is paraded as dignity, yet it is only servitude cloaked in purpose. The majority of men spend their lives not in pursuit of freedom, but in service to the hunger of others, laboring not for truth or beauty, but to perpetuate the machinery of will. To call this career, ambition, or success is only to perfume the stench of slavery. What one earns with a lifetime of toil is not fulfillment, but exhaustion. And when old age arrives, society discards its laborers, like tools grown dull. This is the dignity of work, the slow erosion of the body until it is no longer useful. Entertainment, the great narcotic of our age, is not joy, but distraction. It floods the senses to drown the recognition of futility. Crowds scream in arenas, audiences lose themselves in glowing screens, and hours vanish in the endless scroll of images. Yet when the noise ceases, the silence roars louder. Entertainment is not escape, for nothing is escaped. It is the will feeding upon itself, demanding stimulation to avoid confronting its own emptiness. One laughs at a comedy, one weeps at a tragedy, but both are diversions from the same abyss. And then there is love, the cruelest mask of all. Man believes he has discovered transcendence in the gaze of another. He names it romance, soulmates, destiny. But love is not liberation. It is the will's most insidious trap. For in the fever of passion, man is not pursuing happiness. He is serving the blind command of reproduction. The raptures of desire are only the will's trick to ensnare the body into propagation. And once the fever subsides, once the illusion fades, what remains is often emptiness, resentment, or despair. The myths of eternal love collapse, and the will reveals its true intention, not the happiness of individuals, but the perpetuation of the species' torment. The culture of love feeds this delusion with poetry, songs, and cinema, painting the fever as salvation. But in truth, the lover is only an instrument, compelled to sacrifice peace for longing, calm for obsession, freedom for bondage. The child born of such fever inherits the same hunger, the same chains, and the cycle continues. Thus love, so worshipped, is not liberation from suffering, but its multiplication. What remains when one strips away religion, society, and love? The stark recognition that all these constructions exist only to disguise despair. Culture is not a remedy for suffering. It is the embroidery placed upon suffering's shroud, the machinery of nations, the hymns of priests, the songs of lovers, the achievements of science, all are ornaments covering a corpse. Man dances and sings upon the stage, pretending to forget that beneath the boards lies the grave. Modernity did not free us from illusion, it refined it into subtler poisons. Wealth is pursued with greater frenzy, yet the wealthy remain restless, dissatisfied, haunted by emptiness. The poor, enslaved by necessity, dream of wealth as salvation, not realizing that it only magnifies the hunger it promises to cure. Technology has extended man's reach, but not his peace. He connects instantly across continents, yet feels lonelier than ever. He documents every moment of his life, yet secretly knows it has no enduring weight. Digital culture is a hall of mirrors, infinite images reflecting the same emptiness. The cult of happiness now rules where gods once did. The modern man is commanded not only to survive, but to be happy visibly, constantly, performatively happy. Positivity is demanded as a civic virtue, sadness treated as failure, despair as disease. Thus, even suffering, the very essence of existence, is denied legitimacy. The individual must mask his torment beneath smiles and affirmations, must consume books, courses, and therapies that promise joy, while the gnawing void inside only grows darker. Happiness has become not a state, but a tyranny. The command to feel joy, even when joy is impossible. Technology amplifies this tyranny. Machines that could have softened toil instead bind man deeper into the will's demands. He is reachable at every hour, enslaved not only in body, but in mind. Work follows him into his home, into his bed, into his dreams. The digital world offers infinite novelty, but novelty is not meaning. Each image, each message, each sensation passes like smoke, leaving nothing but the hunger for the next. In this endless flood, the self does not expand, it dissolves. Here the truth sharpens into clarity. All culture, all progress, all illusions are only disguises for the same naked fact: the will is inescapable, and it feeds on every disguise we create. The more we build, the more we hunger. The more we consume, the emptier we become. The will laughs behind every achievement, knowing that none will silence its demand. And so man finds himself not advanced, but more deeply ensnared. He is surrounded by noise, yet more aware of his silence. He is drowned in images, yet blind to reality. He is promised freedom, yet bound tighter to the wheel. The illusions multiply, but their purpose remains the same: to distract the prisoner from the truth that his prison has no exit. What is left when every mask is stripped, every illusion pierced? Not hope, not salvation, not progress, only clarity. A clarity as cold as winter air, as silent as a graveyard. The recognition that existence is not a gift, but a compulsion. That culture does not save us, but entertains us as we walk toward death. That love does not redeem us, but multiplies our chains. That work, wealth, and progress do not liberate, but accelerate the futility of striving. You suffer not because you are broken, but because you exist. This is the truth culture will never admit, for if it did, its machinery would collapse into silence. Wealth promises fullness, yet delivers nothing but an emptier hunger. The man who owns little imagines gold will free him, while the man who owns much knows only the terror of wanting more. Possession never soothes, it inflames. The palace is more restless than the hut. For the poor suffer from lack, but the rich suffer from the impossibility of enough. Their tables overflow, yet their mouths remain dry. Their treasures multiply, yet their nights are sleepless. The more one gains, the heavier the chains of desire become, for the will devours abundance as easily as it devours famine. Consumer culture has made this madness its central faith. Objects parade before the eyes like false prophets. The new device, the new garment, the new escape. Each one promises completion, whispers of identity, seduces with the illusion of transformation. And each one, once obtained, reveals itself to be hollow. The thrill of acquisition fades like smoke, and the hunger gnaws more fiercely than before. Modern man is not freed by his wealth of objects. He is buried beneath them, suffocated by the endless multiplication of useless promises. And technology, that great idol of progress, extends the reach of desire without ever stilling it. The screen delivers infinite novelty, infinite distraction, infinite noise. Yet infinity offers no peace. The scroll never ends, and so the emptiness never ends. The more one consumes, the more apparent becomes the futility of consumption. The digital flood does not quench thirst. It makes thirst eternal. In 1,000 images, in 10,000 messages, nothing remains. Each moment passes without weight, like shadows dissolving before they can be grasped. In this endless torrent, loneliness deepens. For never has man been so connected, and never has he felt so alone. He shouts into the digital void, receives replies without substance, touches thousands of faces without ever touching a soul. He is watched constantly, yet unseen, surrounded by voices, yet unheard. The technology that promised to unite the species has perfected its isolation, each individual caged in the glow of their own device, staring into a mirror of emptiness. The cult of productivity has become another chain, praised as virtue but born of slavery. One must optimize every second, every breath, every gesture. Rest itself is colonized, transformed into self-care, into a duty to return more efficient, more profitable, more exploitable. Leisure is no longer leisure. It is training for greater output. Even sleep must be tracked, measured, improved. The body becomes not a vessel of life, but a factory to be monitored and maximized. And yet, for all this striving, nothing is gained. Time devours every achievement. The grave levels every productivity chart. The worker dies as the idler dies, swallowed by the same silence. Happiness, once whispered by priests as reward in the next world, is now commanded by managers, gurus, and advertisers as a duty in this one. You must be happy. You must be fulfilled. You must radiate joy even when despair hollows you from within. Sadness is treated not as truth, but as weakness. Despair is pathologized, medicated, silenced. To be honest about suffering is to violate the law of positivity, to break the social contract that demands constant smiles. Thus, the last refuge of man, the dignity of admitting his pain, is stolen from him. He must suffer silently, beneath the mask of joy. And still, death waits. No wealth can bribe it. No progress can delay it. No technology can silence its approach. The empire of illusions collapses before the grave. The rich die restless. The poor die weary. The lover dies abandoned. The worker dies used. In the end, all possessions are torn from the hand. All identities stripped away. All illusions shattered by the silence that follows the last breath. Progress may fill museums with inventions, cities with monuments, and networks with images. But the earth absorbs it all without memory. Time swallows every triumph, every name, every song. What is Rome now but dust? What will modernity be but another ruin in the endless procession of ruins? Here the absurdity sharpens into a blade. We strive endlessly, knowing that annihilation waits. We accumulate objects that will rot, pursue status that will fade, chase pleasures that vanish before they are tasted. We construct entire civilizations, only to bury them in centuries of forgetting. The will compels us to build, but time guarantees collapse. Nothing remains. And yet we obey. The will does not ask our consent. It drives us forward, through exhaustion, through despair, through the absurdity of repeating what has already been repeated for millennia. The inventions change, the costumes change, the songs change, but the suffering remains identical. Man eats, lusts, fights, labors, dreams, fears, ages, dies, as he has always done, as he will always do, until the last flicker of the species vanishes into nothing. To see this clearly is not to despair, but to awaken. For despair clings still to hope, and hope is only another disguise. Clarity does not seek remedy, it accepts. It stands naked before the abyss, and does not turn away. To understand that progress cannot save, that culture cannot cure, that happiness cannot be commanded, is to feel the strange coolness of release. The illusions fall silent, and what remains is not triumph, not joy, but stillness. This stillness does not promise comfort. It does not replace despair with ecstasy. It offers only the cessation of delusion, the recognition that striving is endless, that satisfaction is impossible, that the will is merciless. And in that recognition, a shadow of freedom arises, not by conquering the will, but by ceasing to serve it. The world is a theater of shadows. Religion, progress, love, wealth, technology, each a different costume, each concealing the same relentless hunger. When the masks are stripped, the stage falls silent. What remains is the bare truth. Suffering is the substance, desire the machinery, and death the conclusion. You owe nothing to the illusions that enslave you. To see clearly is already a kind of release. Death waits without hurry, without hesitation, without pity. From the moment you draw breath, its approach begins. You do not move toward it, it moves through you. Each hour, each heartbeat, each gesture is already a part of dying. Life is not a path that ends in death. Life is death, unfolding in slow motion. Time is the executioner. It does not strike suddenly, it erodes. It gnaws quietly at the body cells wither, joints stiffen, skin sags, eyes dim. The strength of youth becomes the frailty of age, the vigor of today the weakness of tomorrow. What you call growing older is nothing but the steady subtraction of everything once possessed. Time does not add, it only takes away, until nothing remains to be taken but breath itself. Every ambition stands condemned before this truth. The man who builds empires, the artist who fills canvases, the poet who shapes verses, the soldier who wins battles, all are swallowed by the same silence. Their triumphs vanish as surely as the footprints of a child in sand washed by the tide. History preserves a few names, but even those are only sounds on tongues that will themselves die. Alexander, Caesar, Napoleon, what are they now? Not men, not wills, not desires, but dust, scattered, dissolved into the nothingness they once believed they conquered. And yet, the will does not relent. Knowing the certainty of annihilation, man continues to strive as if immortality lay within his grasp. He fights for wealth that will belong to others, for titles that will be forgotten, for pleasures that cannot survive the moment they are consumed. He runs as if toward victory, yet every step leads closer to the grave. The futility is absolute, but the compulsion is stronger than clarity. Man is not free to stop. The will drives him forward, even into ruin. Ambition is suffering extended across decades. The worker who labors his entire life believes he sacrifices now for peace later, but later never arrives. Retirement, if reached, is often nothing but weariness and the slow decay of the body. The artist imagines his work will outlast him, but centuries dissolve even the grandest monuments into ruins. The lover promises eternal devotion, but death interrupts every vow. All striving, all promises, all ambitions are annulled by time. The grave is the final signature beneath every human endeavor. And what a freedom! Man praises it as his highest good, yet he knows nothing of it. He chooses, yes, but only between desires he did not choose. He moves, yes, but only along paths carved by the will that preceded him. Even rebellion is not escape, it is only the will turning against itself, fighting its own reflection in vain. To claim freedom is to mistake the length of one's chain for the absence of chains. The struggle itself is useless. Generations repeat the same torments, as if condemned to rehearse a tragedy whose ending never changes. The poor hunger, the rich despair, nations rise, nations fall, wars consume, peace returns, only for wars to return again. Each century believes itself different, yet the script remains the same. What we call history is nothing but the recycling of misery dressed in new costumes. Humanity is not progressing, it is circling. The wheel turns, grinding the flesh of every generation into dust. The body betrays most cruelly in its final years. Once celebrated, once adorned, it becomes a burden, a cage of pain. The hands tremble, the spine curves, the breath shortens, the mind fades. The will, once burning with desire, dwindles to a faint, pathetic spark, but it does not extinguish. The old man still clings, still fears, still aches, even as his body crumbles. Death would be a mercy if it arrived swiftly, but instead it delays, stretching out the torment, forcing the being to linger in weakness until even memory itself becomes ash. To live is to be dragged by the will toward a grave one cannot avoid. To strive is to lengthen the torment, to multiply suffering with illusions of meaning. Every banquet, every victory, every embrace collapses in the face of this truth. All is temporary, all is fragile, all is condemned. The beauty of youth fades, the warmth of love cools, the pride of accomplishment crumbles. Time devours everything. And yet, there are rare moments of clarity in this descent. A winter morning where the trees stand leafless against the sky, stripped of ornament, revealing their true form. A silent room where no distraction intrudes, where one feels, however briefly, the stillness beneath the noise. These are not joys, but reprieves, moments when the will loosens its grip, when striving falls silent, when one glimpses the futility of existence without turning away. There is no triumph in such moments, only lucidity. But lucidity itself is a strange release, for it ends the exhausting lie that something more awaits. You are not meant to conquer death. You are meant to dissolve into it. The sooner this truth is faced, the quieter the torment becomes. To live without clinging, to see the futility of striving without demanding remedy, is to walk more lightly, not because the burden is gone, but because one no longer insists that it must transform into something else. Ambition collapses. Desire collapses. History collapses. What remains is not victory, but stillness. The will does not die in a blaze. It withers quietly, like a candle consumed by its own flame. At first, it resists, frantic, grasping for pleasures it once believed eternal. The aging body clutches at youth. The exhausted soul clutches at promises. The trembling heart clutches at illusions. But slowly, inevitably, the fire exhausts itself. Not by decision, not by conquest, but by the slow attrition of time. This is the dimming of desire. The banquet that once seduced now tastes of ash. The lover's body, once feverishly sought, becomes a memory more bitter than sweet. Ambition, once a spear aimed at the heavens, bends into a useless stick, heavy and awkward in the hand. The old man does not renounce willingly, he simply no longer can. His longings dry up, not from strength, but from exhaustion. And in this exhaustion, there is a strange, grim mercy. Renunciation is not heroic. It is not a saint's shining choice, not a sage's triumphant victory over flesh. It is simply the natural fading of the will when its fire has consumed all that can burn. The quiet detachment of age is not wisdom earned, but hunger extinguished. One releases not because one desires release, but because desire itself has collapsed into silence. This silence is not joy. It is not bliss. It is not ecstasy. It is absence, but absence has its own sweetness. A sweetness colder than happiness, lighter than hope, sharper than grief. It is the sweetness of nothing. For nothing cannot disappoint, nothing cannot decay, nothing cannot be taken away. Where desire ends, torment lessens. And where torment lessens, the shadows of stillness appear. What is often called peace is only this: the will grown tired enough to let go. The animal still breathes, the body still moves, but within, the fire dwindles. One looks at the world with indifference, neither grasping nor fleeing, neither clinging nor rejecting. The world no longer appears as promise or threat, but as passing scenery shadows on the wall of a cavern where one no longer longs to escape. The beauty of withering lies in its honesty. Leaves fall without protest, flowers rot without apology, rivers dry, mountains erode, stars collapse, all without regret, all without resistance. Only man resists, clings, rages against decline. But in the end, he too must join the silence of the leaves, the rot of the flowers, the collapse of the stars. To wither is not to fail, it is to return. There is a stillness beyond striving. It is not sought, it is not built, it is not earned. It simply remains when all else dissolves. It is deeper than joy, for joy trembles with fragility. It is heavier than sorrow, for sorrow still clings to what is lost. Stillness is neither gain nor loss. It is the end of the arithmetic. In this stillness, the self begins to dissolve. For what is the self but the collection of desires? Remove desire, and the scaffolding of identity collapses. The I that chased, grasped, longed, demanded, has no anchor left. What remains is a shadow without weight, a breath without owner, an emptiness not feared, but welcomed. And so, the final surrender comes not with thunder, but with quiet, not with victory, but with fading, not with salvation, but with disappearance. The will, once roaring, dwindles to a whisper, then to silence. The body lies still, the breath ceases, the flame gutters out. The room is empty, the candle is extinguished. There is no more striving, there is no more self, there is no more, and that is enough. The will does not vanish all at once. It dies in fragments, in small diminishments, in quiet surrenders that go unnoticed until they are complete. You once desired, with a fever that made the world tremble, a body, a victory, a possession. Now that same fire smolders faintly, unable to ignite even the dry kindling before it. What once burned like an inferno now glows like a coal in ash, dim, fragile, almost embarrassed to remain. This is not liberation, it is exhaustion. The soldier does not throw down his sword in triumph, but because his arm can no longer lift it. The lover does not renounce passion because of clarity, but because passion itself has withdrawn, leaving only echoes. The worker does not forsake labor because of wisdom, but because the body collapses under the weight of years. The renunciation so often praised in saints and sages is merely what time imposes on every creature. The will wears itself out, and in its collapse, silence comes. Silence is not joy. Do not mistake it for that. It is not the bliss promised by religion, not the radiant ecstasy of eternal reward. It is absence, but absence can be sweeter than presence. For presence always wounds, always threatens, always slips away. Absence does not torment. Absence is empty, but in emptiness, the torment ceases. To have nothing is not poverty. If nothing also means the end of hunger. The sweetness of nothing is bitter to those who still desire. They fear the void as children fear the dark, imagining monsters in its silence. But for the weary soul, nothing is not a terror but a relief. Nothing does not demand, does not deceive, does not change. It is the only state that cannot betray. Everything that exists wounds, and everything that ends wounds again. But nothing wounds no one. The body knows this truth before the mind admits it. It slows, it loses its former hungers. Food becomes bland, pleasures become heavy. Even memory itself begins to fade, as if it too desires rest. The senses grow dull, and in that dullness lies a mercy. The constant assault of the world softens, until all that remains is the faint hum of existence. And then, even that begins to quiet. The body withdraws, piece by piece, until the soul, if such a thing can be said to exist, stands almost free. What is the self in this twilight? It is less than it was, yet strangely more transparent. For the self was always only the sum of its cravings. You were a bundle of hungers, strung together by memory and named I. Remove the hungers, and the bundle falls apart. What remains is not an identity, not a figure, not a will, but a ghost of awareness without weight. The I dissolves, not violently, but gently, as salt dissolves into water, as mist dissolves into air. To watch this dissolution is to see the futility of clinging. You grasp at what is already slipping, like water through your fingers, like breath escaping your chest. The attempt itself is agony, the release is mercy. Leaves fall not because they choose to, but because gravity calls them down. So too the soul falls, naturally, silently, into the stillness of nothing. The beauty of withering lies in its simplicity. Flowers decay with more grace than men, for they do not resist. They bloom, they wilt, they rot, they vanish. They offer their fragrance, their color, their fragile life, then surrender. They do not cling to summer when autumn comes. They do not rage against frost. Man, by contrast, rages, clings, begs. He fears that the end of striving means the end of self, not seeing that the self was nothing but the striving itself. When the will dies, the I dies with it, and this is not tragedy, but completion. The world does not mourn the falling leaf. The earth does not weep for the river that runs dry. The stars do not resist their collapse into darkness. All dissolves without protest. Only man insists upon being eternal, as if eternity were not already the greatest curse. What would eternal life be but eternal hunger, eternal striving, eternal torment? Blessed are the leaves, for they fall. Blessed are the stars, for they die. Blessed is man, when at last he joins them in silence. There is a moment rare, fleeting, when one senses this before the end. A quiet hour, perhaps at dusk, when the world outside grows still. You sit in a room with no sound but the faint ticking of time, and for once you do not resist. You feel the weight of striving lessen, not because you conquered it, but because it lost interest in you. You are not joy, not sorrow, not hope, not despair. You are only presence dissolving into absence. And for a breath, it feels enough. Do not call it peace. Peace implies reconciliation between warring parts. There is no reconciliation here, only the fading of battle altogether. The armies have dissolved, the field lies empty, the weapons rust quietly in the grass. This is not victory, it is not defeat. It is the end of both. Do not call it freedom. Freedom implies choice, agency, mastery. There is no choice here. The will collapses not because you decide, but because it cannot continue. What you mistake as freedom is only the absence of compulsion, the falling away of chains when the prisoner himself turns to dust. It is not freedom won, it is freedom by disappearance. The end comes without fanfare. Not the great drama of redemption, not the glowing light of transcendence, but the simple cessation of motion. The breath shortens, the heart weakens, the senses dim, the will releases. The candle flickers, stutters, and goes dark. Not with a cry, not with a proclamation, but with a silence deeper than silence. And then nothing. No striving, no self, no world, no need for any of it. This is not tragedy. It is the only mercy existence allows. The will, having tormented itself through countless years, generations, and desires, at last dissolves. The torment ends not in paradise, not in fulfillment, but in the quiet sweetness of non-being. The nothing that terrified you all your life proves to be the only true refuge. And so the monologue ends as life ends. Not in triumph, not in despair, but in vanishing. The words fade as the body fades. The voice falls silent as the breath falls silent. The candle gutters out in the empty room. Nothing remains, and that is enough.